The New York Giants have a new defensive coordinator, Dennard Wilson. So, what are they getting from him? We're going to check in with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans to get the lowdown. That's coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, now the #1 sports podcast network in America. My name is Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And we welcome on in our everydayers, our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And folks, I'm excited. I have a super guest here who's going to talk about the Giants' reported new defensive hire, Dennard Wilson, defensive coordinator. He was previously with the Titans, actually a guy that the Giants tried to hire a couple of years ago after the Wink Martindale divorce. So here to talk to us about Dennard Wilson and what the Giants are getting in him is the one and only madman himself, Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans. Tyler, what's up, my friend?
Not much. I mean, like everybody else in this country, I'm just trying to survive this crazy snow. But, that doesn't mean that the business of football slows down, as we all know.
No, it doesn't. And the Giants have been busy beavers over the weekend. A lot of coaching hires being leaked out. They're not official. The team hasn't made them official yet, but a lot of hires coming out, and one of which is Dennard Wilson, who you know very well. You covered him for 2 years. I think it was 2 years with the Titans. Tyler, we're coming to you wanting to know, what are the Giants getting in Dennard Wilson?
I think Dennard Wilson is an excellent football coach, and I think the reality is a lot of things went wrong in Tennessee, and I don't think that he is one of them. And I think I point to a recent interview by Jeffrey Simmons. Many people may not know much about the Titans, and that's perfectly fine. They've won 3 games in back-to-back seasons. If you don't know many of their players, I wouldn't blame you, but pretty much everybody knows Jeffrey Simmons at this point. And Simmons did a recent interview where basically he criticized Brian Callahan and his coaching and taking accountability, but he said Dennard Wilson was a guy who would demand that accountability. He would expect the best out of his players. He would really be hard on guys and drive them to get the best out of them. So, we'll talk about what scheme he runs, what he does well, what he doesn't do well, all these different things. But I think at the core of it, you have to be able to lead men. You have to be able to earn the respect of your players and put them in a good position and have them buy into what you're selling. And I think Dennard Wilson absolutely does that. And he's a guy who may not be an immediate concern for Giants fans, but I think eventually, we could see Dennard Wilson get a head coaching job down the line. I think he's got that kind of pool in a locker room, and he did, I think, as best as he possibly could with the Titans defense.
You mentioned accountability, and it's interesting because that is something that has maybe been missing a little bit on the Giants, something that John Harbaugh is demanding of not just his coaches, but of his players. And Tyler, just talk to us a little bit about, I don't know if you have an example, but has there been an instance where maybe Dennard Wilson has sat a guy because he dogged it?
Yeah, I think there are perfect examples of that, especially in the secondary. I think there were some cornerback changes. You saw certain players not execute certain schemes very well. He would go to the next guy. And I think it's not a specific player getting benched, but, Dennard Wilson was very honest with the media when mistakes happen. Hey, there's a play. He will sit up there, while some coaches won't, he'll sit up there and tell you, well, we were in a cover 4 match scheme. They ran a post wheel concept. The safety is supposed to bail out and take the post over the middle and flip off the wheel to the corner, and the safety didn't do that, and we got beat behind. Like, he's going to tell it like it is. And if he's saying that to the media, Patricia, as you know, he's going to be really holding those guys accountable behind the scenes and demanding that they read their cues and they do the right things. And I think that the Titans struggled in the back end this year, and a lot of it had to do with injuries. I mean, we can get to all the injuries that they dealt with at cornerback and safety, but at the end of the day, he was upfront, he was honest, and if somebody made a serious mistake and an obvious mistake, he's going to be willing to say that, because that is what accountability is. Now, he never threw his players under the bus, in my opinion. He never crossed over that line, but he would tell the honest truth and what it is. And I think that sort of transparency is what accountability is all about. And again, if he's saying it that way to the media, I know that he's truly holding the guys accountable behind the scenes, because you can't say stuff like that to the media and not be honest when you're talking to the players, or you'll lose your players pretty quickly. And that never happened with Dennard Wilson.
All right, now, Tyler, tell us a little bit about the scheme that Dennard Wilson ran in Tennessee.
I would call it a disguised zone scheme. He'll run man coverage when he feels like he has to, but they really utilize cover 4 quite a bit. They use match cover 4 principles where, you're playing a cover 4 defense, but guys kind of decide what route is theirs, and then it almost turns into man as the play develops, a match coverage. I also think that he does a really good job of mixing up and disguising coverage. He runs a lot of inverted cover 2, where traditional cover 2, you have your 2 deep safeties who have their deep halves. Well, he'll have a cornerback drop back as a deep half. He'll have a slot cornerback drop back as a deep half. He'll run cover 3 buzz coverages where it's 2 high safety looks and one of the safeties slide down into the middle of the field. He gets very creative with how he disguises coverages in the back end, and I think that's really important in today's NFL landscape. You can't just play what you play. Like the Legion of Boom Seahawks, they said, we're running cover 3, good luck, beat us. I don't think you can do that with how advanced some of the offensive minds are in the NFL now. If you just show and play, they're going to beat you. So Wilson does a great job of mixing up his coverages, disguising his coverages, and that's on the back end. I would say on the front end, he is very, very creative with what he does with his front looks. Now, he may not have to be as creative because there's so much defensive line talent in New York. That's why I think it's kind of a good pairing, because he came as a defensive backs coach. He is a passing game specialist from his time in Philly and then his time in Baltimore. That's what he does well. So maybe he doesn't have to get as creative up front like he did with the Titans, because they lacked pass rush talent, especially like he would have safeties, slot corners, linebackers lined up on the edges and running around and doing twists and stunts and stuff to try to create pressure. And the Titans really, without a lot of edge rushing talent, if you go look, they had Jihad Ward and Arden Key and Jalen Harrell, a 7th-round rookie. Like, they had basically nobody on the edge. And if you start to look at the Titans defense from about week 8 on, you're going to see a team that was in the top half of the NFL in sacks, top half of the NFL in pressure. I mean, the Titans finished middle of the road in sacks. And if you listen to anything that I said before the season, I'm like, this team is going to be bottom 10, bottom 5 in pressure because the talent is so bad. And he found a way. And that's the test of a coach, right? Yeah, we don't have the talent, but what can I do? What can I do to help this team out? And again, everything that Dennard Wilson could possibly do to help this football team and get the best out of them, I thought he did. And that comes with disguise coverage in the back end, with multiple zone coverage schemes, and with being very creative with his fronts.
Tyler, you mentioned he was a defensive backs coach for Baltimore. How much of the Baltimore defense did he bring with him to the Titans? And how much of that do you think will translate over to the Giants?
No, I 100% think that is what he did. I mean, it's very similar with like what Mike McDonald was doing. You know what I mean? He wants to be very multiple. He wants to be too high. He wants to keep a lid on the defense, prevent explosive plays. And it gets very difficult when those match coverages are executed properly. Yeah, you're looking at cover 4, but then it turns into man in the middle of the play because the backside safety picked up the crosser and the deep safety picked up the post, and now there's nobody there, even though the coverage would dictate that if you can get the safety to come up a little, the deep post will be there behind it. But the way that he does it, if he has the talent and the guys to execute it, it's very, very difficult to get around. Now, I'm not as familiar with what the secondary looks like in New York. I would imagine that the upfront talent, as it with Dexter Lawrence and Abdul Carter and Thibodeau and Brian Burns, like that's probably the strength of the defense, and I think that'll be new to him, because even in Baltimore, their secondary was absolutely fantastic with Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton, and they had Geno Stone have a great year with Dennard Wilson with 7 interceptions. Like I think a lot of that makes sense, but for the most part, it depends on the talent, but he's going to get the most out of the talent in the back end. So that should give Giants fans, I think that makes it like a perfect pairing. It's like peanut butter and jelly, because a guy who's so good at getting the most out of the secondary can take a secondary that may not be as talented as the up front, and now he actually has the Bulls up front to balance that out. So I think it could make, if he gets the best out of the secondary, even if the talent isn't as high, and pairs it with the super talent they have on the front, that could be a very dangerous defense.
Hey, Giant fans, the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked in on every moment than with Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where it always feels good to be right. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections. There's no drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. Just pick two or more players and choose more or less on their projections. Their early payouts let you cash out if a player gets off to a hot start, and you can mix stars from different teams and build lineups that fit how you watch the game. Download the Prize Picks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app right now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps tradings involve significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Speaking of the secondary, I'll fill you in a little bit because I'm kind of curious to know what he kind of looks for in the secondary. The Giants, of course, a pair of safeties. They've got Javon Holland, who used to be with Miami. They've got Tyler Nubin, who kind of went backwards a little bit. At cornerback, they have Paulson Adebo, who was with the Saints, in 2024. But they, right now, Cordell Flott is their other starting cornerback. He's an unrestricted free agent pending.
Mm-hmm.
Deonte Banks, the number one draft pick, who has just been an absolute disaster. So that being said, I think the defensive secondary is probably going to undergo a little bit of a makeover. And then let's not forget Drew Phillips, the slot cornerback. So that being said, Tyler, what kind of defensive backs, particularly at corner, can they get away with? I mean, do they need to have press man all the time or flexibility? Or what do you see them maybe needing for Dennard Wilson's back end of the defense to really hum?
At cornerback, especially on the outside, it's not necessarily press man that he's looking for, but press zone. He wants to play those zone coverages. And what they do is, again, they're cover four. I will admit, Patricia, I'm learning every day. I don't know as much about NFL football as Dennard Wilson. Like, let's just be honest to the viewers here. I think I know my stuff to a point, but he's probably forgot more about football than I'll ever know. That's just the reality of him being a true professional NFL coach. But they ran a coverage this year that I hadn't been super familiar with in my past, and it's a cover four man, where they're basically running cover four zone, but the outside corners almost have man responsibilities. And even when they're not in a pure cover four man, they run that cover four a lot. They'll run cover three, and he wants feisty cornerbacks that will press at the line of scrimmage, whether you're dropping back in zone, whether you're playing man. I would look at a guy who plays in New York as well, or New Jersey, whatever, the New York Jets. The Titans traded Jarvis Brownlee Jr. to the New York Jets, and Jarvis Brownlee was in his second year. He was an absolute dog at the line of scrimmage during college and for the Titans. L'Jarius Sneed did not work out for the Titans, but I'm sure a lot of NFL fans have seen the video from Sneed's last year in Kansas City where he's just erasing wide receivers at the line of scrimmage and press. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a press man focus. You don't necessarily need man coverage experts, but guys who want to get up in your face at the line of scrimmage, be feisty, good with their hands, physical, and aren't scared to do that and then get beat behind them. That's what he's looking for. And I think in the slot, he gets creative with the slot. I would be curious to see how he handles it because he did a lot of big nickel with the Titans where on early downs, on first and second down, where the run game is more prevalent than on third down, he would actually use a safety as the nickel cornerback. Now, the Titans had a lot of problems at corner. They traded Roger McCreary, a good slot corner who plays for the Rams now. They traded Jarvis Brownlee Jr., their starter. L'Jarius Sneed got hurt again in the middle of the year. So he's working with 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. I mean, they're playing multiple practice squad guys at cornerback by the end of the season. So it was difficult for him in that sense. And that's why like the rankings and the stats and the numbers may not look as good as I think Dennard Wilson is. But at the end of the day, he's going to look for guys who are aggressive, physical, feisty, and are not scared to play on the outside to get into your face. And I think on the back end and the safety, you need versatile guys. He doesn't want a guy who's just a pure post safety who plays center field or a Cam Chancellor who just comes down the middle and plays box safety. He wants guys with versatility that can do a little bit of everything. So on the outside, feisty, physical guys that can get in your face. And then in the back end, he wants versatility that can do a little bit of everything, which lends towards that multiplicity, that disguise coverage type. If you have guys who can just only do certain things, you're not going to be able to fool the offense that much. So when all of your safeties and your corners can do different things, that allows him to be more multiple. So on the outside, he wants physical guys who will get into your face at the line of scrimmage. And at safety, he wants guys with versatile skill sets. That's what I would look for as he maybe remodels the secondary in his image.
Another area of the Giants defense, which has just been so bad, the run defense, the linebackers in particular, guys just not filling their gaps and just the tackles, the missed tackles, the poor angles and stuff like that. I don't know what the Titans' problems were this past year. I know the defense fell off a little bit, but what are some of the ways that maybe Dennard Wilson can mitigate some of the run defensive problems that pop up with missed tackles and not filling gaps? I mean, what are some of the things he can do to ensure that these big runs aren't happening?
Well, one thing I will tell you is Dennard Wilson really made great adjustments at the bye week to help the run defense out. I mean, before that, the Titans, the first 9 weeks of the season, they were like a bottom 5, bottom 7 run defense. And then you look at the final stretch of the season after the week 10 bye, 75 yards allowed, 114, 70, 61, 138 against San Francisco, which Kyle Shanahan, but then 51, 103, 64. So you're looking at, 5 games right there where he held people 75 yards or under. And I think a lot of that has to do with, Tavondre Sweat had some injuries early in the year, the big-bodied nose tackle who the Titans got out of Texas a couple of years ago. He was banged up early in training camp, didn't get a great start to the year and played better as the year went on. Jeffrey Simmons missed a couple of games in the middle that didn't help. The Titans had Cody Barton at linebacker, and, I hate to be rude, but he was running out there like he had glass in his shoes. That guy he couldn't move around. He couldn't get off a block. So I think it was tough for him. But, again, he made adjustments at the bye. And one thing that struggles for him is he wants to play in nickel. He does not want to be in base defense. He wants to have, that his adjustment rather than going to base defense if he's getting blown up in the run game is we're going to go to big nickel. Instead of having 3 cornerbacks on the field and 2 safeties, we're going to have 3 safeties. And then that slot cornerback is a safety, which allows us to have a little bit more physicality out there on the field because a safety is, in theory, going to tackle better than a cornerback is. So I think one of the issues with the run defense for Dennard is he is just so committed to nickel defense and having 5 defensive backs out on the field at all times to prevent those explosive plays. But he was very open and honest, like I said earlier, of the run defense problems for the Titans more often than not, in my opinion, were missed tackles, not scheme, not Dennard Wilson's a nickel and they're running 3 tight ends and they can't match up. No, they would do a pretty good job in all of those things. Now, what I will say is it's very important that the edge rushers are good against the run. Because if you're going to play 4-man fronts and you're not going to play base defense where you have your 3-4, he is a 3-4 defense. But Patricia, as I tell my audience all the time, the 4-3, 3-4 discussions are antiquated. That is not how teams play defense anymore. You see 60 to 70% nickel for basically every single team in the NFL. So talking about what the base defensive structure is seems irrelevant to me. It's more important to talk about the traits that are required for players within the defense. And I think like the Titans drafted Femi Oladipo out of UCLA, who was a former off-ball linebacker that they converted to an edge rusher. He wasn't a great pass rusher, but he was great against the run before he got injured and broke his leg. So I think, as we're talking about what players they could look for in the draft or free agency, that's what all your, listeners are going to be wondering is, how does this affect the roster going forward? Now, I think bigger bodied edge rushers who can hold up against the run and four-man fronts will be critical, and that's because he likes to play in nickel. So I think the run defense will be something to watch for Giants fans. If it goes off the rails, it's because they can't stop the run. But a lot of those problems for the Titans were, quite frankly, execution, getting out of gaps, not stacking and shedding blocks, and the tackling was a major issue in any game where the Titans gave up a bunch of rush yards. It really came down to player execution.
Hey, Giant fans, if you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but ended up not being the right fit, you know how that can set you back. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes and deal with less stress and less time with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of the Locked On Giants podcast get a $75 sponsor job credit to help give their job opening the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Tyler, you mentioned execution, and one of the things I've screamed about when it comes to the Giants defense is they don't practice tackling when they have the opportunity. They don't really work on the fundamentals. How much does Dennard Wilson stress that in the practices?
I don't think that was a big stressor, but I don't know that I blame Dennard Wilson for that. I think a lot of that came from Brian Callahan. I don't mean to overly criticize Brian Callahan, who was a good person and a nice person, but he did not carry the biggest stick, I guess, to use a metaphor. He wasn't an authoritarian in a sense. Like, he was very light on the players. He didn't demand them, and that was one of the big changes that happened after Brian Callahan was fired, is Mike McCoy, who was the interim head coach, he picked up the tempo in practice. He had him go a little bit harder in practice. So I don't think that was as big of an emphasis as it could have been, but I think a lot of that had to do with Brian Callahan not really being a very crass head coach. He was more friendly to the players, and I think a guy like John Harbaugh, and remember, Dennard Wilson was in Baltimore with John Harbaugh, I think more of an old school, hard-nosed coach like Harbaugh, who understands, hey, I've been through the wars, I've been through the battles, and these hard-hitting practices that players may not like, where we do emphasize tackling and we do focus on form and we put a lot into that, and it may, cause the players a little dismay in the summertime when you're tired and you're in camp. But when we get into December and November and it's cold and teams don't want to tackle, we're going to be ready to do that. So I think that John Harbaugh will help correct that issue more than it being a Dennard Wilson thing, because if it were up to Wilson, in my opinion, they would have pushed the defense and pushed the players a lot harder in those physicality realms.
Tyler, if there's one area or one thing that maybe Giant fans should be concerned with Dennard Wilson as a defensive coordinator. I mean, he sounds wonderful. Mm-hmm. What's the one thing that maybe, during his time with the Titans, you were like, yeah, I wish this was a little different?
The complexity of the scheme on the back end. We talk about the disguises. We talk about the match coverage, the different variations of cover 4 and cover 6 and cover 2. Like, all of that is great. But, Patricia, you better have people who are locked into their assignment. And the Titans' defensive backs got criticized by other teams more than once, saying, oh, they were lazy in their assignments. Hey, we watched the tape and we knew that we could bait them in this way. When you run complex things That's great if you have your starters and everyone's on the same page and you have smart players who understand route concepts and during the play can pick that up. But if I fake a deep crosser and then I bend it out to the corner and you're lazy and you just go to take the crosser and then I get you out of position, now I got a big explosive play down the field. And I think that the Titans were susceptible to big plays down the field because once the players started getting hurt and Dennard Wilson, is this criticizing him? He even said, hey, our top 3 cornerbacks are all gone now because of injury or 2 trades. I'm dealing with guys who weren't here at the beginning of the year. Yeah, it might be difficult for those guys to pick up a complex scheme and know what to do with every route combination they're going to see in every scenario and play great situational football. Like, you could be a genius if you're studying high-level calculus, but it's really easy to not be a genius when you're studying high-level calculus. More often than not, people don't get it. So I think when you run complex things on the back end, you set yourself up to really confuse defenses. But the other side of that is offenses, you could confuse your own defensive guys because you're asking so much from them mentally. So like in theory, when you have a Baltimore Ravens secondary that's so talented with all pros and Pro Bowl level players, yeah, you could pull off that stuff. But if as injuries hit, if you're the Giants and you're maybe don't have great talent in the secondary, I think it can be more difficult to execute those things because you really are asking a lot mentally from your players. It's not really a go out and just play type defense. You really got to have your thinking cap on to be in the secondary in that defense, and that can lead to busted coverages and explosive plays.
All right, now, Tyler, final question for you. The last time I think I had you on to talk about a defensive coordinator when the Giants hired Shane Bowen, who turned out to be a nice man, but just a disaster.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't know if you remember, maybe you've chosen to forget about his time in Tennessee, which I wouldn't blame you, but how does Dennard Wilson's defense vary from what Shane Bowen ran? And, again, based on what the Giants personnel to be, is it a better fit for what Dennard Wilson, or are they still missing some pieces, do you think?
Well, quite frankly, and I've had some Giants fans online remind me that I didn't hate the hire of Shane Bowen, but at the end of the day, I think Dennard Wilson is a much better defensive coordinator, and a lot of it has to do with how he operates in the secondary. When we were on the show, I did criticize Shane Bowen for far too often allowing his cornerbacks to be way too far off the line of scrimmage, given easy access, easy slants. It'll be 3rd and 6, and he would have cornerbacks 10 yards deep. And it's like we're just giving up these easy passes. So that was a criticism of Bowen. What I think is Dennard Wilson is much more creative in how he finds answers, where Shane Bowen, at least in his time in Tennessee, he was real good with twists and stunts up front with the defensive line. He was able to get pressure. The Titans' run defense was pretty good, even though they played a lot of nickel. He did sort of similar things in terms of varying his personnel groupings to try to help himself in the run game. But I think Dennard Wilson's creativity with his coverages in the back end, and then the things that Dennard Wilson is willing to do with, hey, we're going to, like the Titans didn't have a lot of talent at edge rusher, but they had rookie safety Kevin Winston out of Penn State, who was 6'3" with long arms and was super physical. They used him as an edge rusher a couple of different times. He blitzed linebackers up the middle. So Dennard Wilson was willing to be much more creative to find answers, where Bowen wasn't as creative in finding his answers. He kind of just stuck with what he knew. We're doing twists and stunts up front with 4 defensive linemen. We're playing off coverage even on 3rd and medium and 3rd and short. So I just think that Bowen was too rigid and wouldn't look for more answers away from what he knew, where Dennard Wilson has shown he'll pull up every rock and every flower to try to find an answer no matter what it takes. So I think the creativity level and the lack of stubbornness by Dennard Wilson separates him from Shane Bowen, and I think that makes it a better fit and higher upside. But I want to say, in fairness, the Giants' operation wasn't very good, so you could look at Bowen and say he did a terrible job, which is fair, but a lot of people didn't do a very good job for New York in the last couple of years. So hopefully, the rising tide of John Harbaugh lifts all boats, and Dennard Wilson can be a boat that's lifted by that as well, along with the extra creativity and just the extra talent that I think he brings to the table.
And Tyler, just real quick as a postscript, because I always wondered about this, how much of what Bowen ran was Mike Vrabel or when he was down in Tennessee? I mean, just trying to figure out if he was that bad or that reliant on Mike Vrabel.
No, I think that's fair to say. And look, Mike Vrabel has gone to New England, and they had Tyrell Williams as their defensive coordinator at the beginning of the year. And, shout out to Coach T. Stay strong. I hope he gets healthy, but he got cancer. And after week 2, it's been Zach Orr. Don't tell Stephen A. Smith that, who clearly didn't know that this week for ESPN. But Zach Orr has been the defensive coordinator, and the Patriots defense has been very good throughout the season and been very good in the playoffs. And I think you could say, hey, Zach Orr is great and, Tyrell Williams set the foundation. But we know that Mike Vrabel is one of the most gifted minds in football. He really understands things on both sides of the ball, along with being a CEO-style guy who can manage the game. I think from a game planning standpoint, there aren't very many people better than Mike Vrabel at watching the tape, knowing we need to do this in this situation, and having that in your ear when you're calling plays, having one of the smartest football minds in the entire league in your ear to remind you of certain things, certainly allowed Shane Bowen to be better than not having that guy in his ear, not having that hand on his shoulder. So I think that did bring down Shane Bowen's capability. But as you know, it's hard to separate how much credit this guy gets and how much did the head coach help. And, without being in the building and being the walls that can hear the conversations, it's hard to separate how much credit everybody should get. And I think it's fair to surmise that, maybe Shane Bowen did get a lot of help from the mind of Mike Vrabel that allowed him to maybe sink more than swim when he got out on his own. But Dennard Wilson, on the other hand, did not live under the shadow of Mike McDonald with the Titans and still got a lot out of that defense as we have discussed throughout the episode.
Well, Tyler, I'm excited to see what he brings. Hopefully, the defense to me, a lot more talented than I think what the results show. So hopefully.
No, I agree. And I had my run-ins with Giants fans after the Harbaugh decision, and I like to have my fun on Twitter, as you know, and throw a couple of fireballs out there. But I'm very high on the Giants. I think they're going to turn this thing around, and I think like we saw with the Jaguars last year or the Patriots this year, I think there's more talent on the roster than what the coaching staff was able to get out of them. I see the Giants really being a much more formidable team this year, and I look forward to seeing it happen.
As do I. Tyler, appreciate all the insight. You're awesome. Love it when we get together. I know we see each other once every 4 years, except when there's a hire or a free agent that comes on. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Tyler the Madman Rowland. You can catch him on Locked On Titans as well as Locked On NFL in the morning shift. The evening shift, of course, is our guy, Tony Wiggins,
the OG
of Locked On Jaguars. So check him out. Check out all our hosts. We just, we really work hard at it, and we try to bring you the best possible content available. For Tyler Rowland, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, we'll catch you tomorrow. I've got a special guest coming up tomorrow that you will not want to miss on the Locked On Giants podcast.